The rain poured endlessly over the streets of Seattle that evening, washing over the glass and steel of the city as if it were trying to scrub away the dust, the noise, and maybe a few broken promises too. Inside a quiet corner cafe, dimly lit by amber lights and softened by the low hum of jazz, sat Ethan Cole, a man whose sharp blue eyes had long forgotten how to shine. A cooling cup of coffee rested in front of him, untouched, while his gaze stayed fixed on the window, watching raindrops race each other down the glass like silent tears. The chair across from him remained empty, just as it had every Friday evening for the past 6 months, and when he finally spoke, his voice was barely louder than the rain as he murmured to himself, "She never came," the words falling from his lips like a confession that nobody had asked him to make. Ethan had once been a man who believed in everything: success, love, destiny, and the simple, stubborn idea that hard work could solve any problem life handed him. Only a year earlier, he had been a rising corporate consultant in a prestigious Seattle firm, known for his precision, his calm charm, and the quiet confidence that made people trust him in the boardroom. But beneath that polished exterior, his life had been slowly, quietly unraveling. He had been waiting for someone, a woman he had thought he would spend the rest of his life with. Her name was Emily. They had met 2 years earlier in this very cafe, at this very table. She had been an artist, messy and vibrant, full of color and chaos and laughter, painting his gray, organized world with wild brush strokes of dreams and spontaneity. Then, without warning, life did what it so often does. It turned cruel. On a night much like this one, with the same relentless rain beating against the window, Emily had called him, her voice trembling as she said she had to leave, something about her family, something about not being ready, followed by a promise that she would come back. Ethan had waited for her that night. She never walked through the door. And still, every week since, he had come back to the same seat, the same table, sipping coffee and staring out at the rain, living on the thin, fragile hope that maybe one day she would return and time would start moving again. Outside, life surged forward, promotions, meetings, laughter with friends. But inside, he remained stuck in that single moment when she said goodbye. Tonight, though, something in the air felt different. The rain seemed heavier, colder, like it was pushing harder against the city. The cafe was quieter than usual, the few remaining customers scattered in distant corners, and for reasons Ethan couldn't quite explain, his chest felt tighter than it had in a long time. Margaret, the barista, a kind older woman who had watched his Friday ritual play out week after week, refilled his cup with her usual gentle care and asked softly, "Still waiting for her, sweetheart?" He managed a faint, crooked smile and replied, "Yeah, I guess I am," though even to his own ears the certainty in that answer sounded thinner than before. Fate, however, that quiet architect of our strangest turns and most beautiful accidents, had begun rearranging the evening in ways Ethan couldn't see yet. As he lifted his eyes back to the window, he noticed something new. Outside, standing under the assault of the rain, was a young woman, soaked through, her coat clinging to her like wilted petals. Her face was pale, her lips trembling slightly from the cold, and in one hand she clutched the bent remains of a broken umbrella. Beside her stood a little girl, maybe 6 or 7 years old, bundled in a pink raincoat and clutching a small stuffed bunny so tightly it was as if the toy were the only warm thing she owned. The woman was crying, trying to hold herself together for the child's sake, but her red, swollen eyes betrayed her exhaustion and fear. Something in that image pierced straight through Ethan's numbness. The sight of a woman crying in the rain pulled at a raw place inside him, stirring a pain that felt both foreign and familiar. Without fully realizing what he was doing, he rose from his chair and moved closer to the window, just as the woman lifted her head and their eyes met. For the briefest second, Their gazes locked, and in that single glance, there was a wordless recognition. Pain, seeing pain. Margaret's voice floated softly from behind the counter as she watched the scene unfold, whispering that the woman had been out there for 10 minutes already, maybe waiting for someone who never showed. Ethan hesitated, feeling the weight of his own 6 months of waiting press against that thought, and something inside him shifted. Perhaps, he realized, it was time to stop waiting for someone who had chosen not to return and start noticing the world that was still right in front of him. He grabbed his umbrella, pushed open the cafe door, and stepped into the downpour. The rain was shockingly cold against his skin, but he barely felt it as he approached the woman and the child. "Hey," he said gently, careful not to startle them, "you and your daughter shouldn't be out here in weather like this." The woman flinched slightly, quickly wiping at her tears, and apologized, insisting that they were fine, that they just needed a place to wait, though her voice cracked halfway through the sentence. Ethan glanced at the little girl, who was peeking up at him with a mix of curiosity and caution, while holding her mother's hand as if it were an anchor in a storm. He told them they could come inside, that it was warm, and that the cafe served hot chocolate. For a moment, the woman seemed ready to refuse. He could see pride and exhaustion warring inside her. But then the little girl tugged at her sleeve and whispered, "Mommy, please." And that simple plea broke through whatever wall she'd been trying to hold. They followed him into the cafe, dripping rain onto the floor, and Margaret immediately appeared with towels and a kindness that did not ask questions. Soon the sweet smell of cocoa filled the air, and the little girl's shoulders relaxed as she wrapped her small hands around a steaming cup, her cheeks slowly pinking up in the warmth. The woman introduced herself as Grace, and the little girl as Lily. Grace thanked Ethan quietly, her voice soft and careful, and as they talked in hesitant fragments, she began to share pieces of her story. She had moved to Seattle only a few weeks earlier, after losing her job in Portland. Her husband had left 2 years before that, and she had been raising Lily alone ever since. Rent was due, steady work was still out of reach, and fear lurked under every sentence she spoke, though she tried to keep her tone light for her daughter's sake. "I just wanted her to have something warm tonight," she admitted, glancing over at Lily. "We were going to walk to the shelter once the rain slowed down." Ethan listened, feeling his chest tighten with every word. For so long he had been drowning in his own grief and absence that he'd almost forgotten that other people carried their own storms in silence. The night stretched on, and the cafe slowly emptied until it was just the 4 of them and the quiet music. Grace's laughter, uncertain and fragile at first, began to emerge in small, gentle bursts as Lily drew shapes and smiley faces on the fogged-up window, and before he realized it, Ethan found himself smiling too. A real, unforced smile he hadn't felt in months. When Grace finally stood to leave, carefully pulling Lily's hood up, Ethan stopped her and asked if they had somewhere safe to stay that night. She hesitated, then answered that the shelter might have a bed available, and if not, they would figure something out. Every instinct in him resisted the idea of them walking back into the storm. "There's a motel a few blocks from here," he said quietly. "Please let me help." She tried to refuse at first, her pride bristling against the offer, but when Lily shivered again and clung closer to her side, she finally nodded. Ethan walked them to the motel under his umbrella, the rain easing into a soft drizzle as they moved through the wet streets, and when they reached the entrance, Grace turned to him with eyes that looked tired but no longer hopeless. She told him that he hadn't had to do any of this, but that she was grateful and would not forget his kindness. That night, as Ethan returned alone to his apartment, something inside him felt different. The ache of Emily's absence was still there, a bruised place in his heart, but it no longer swallowed him whole. He had seen, maybe for the first time in a long while, a different kind of love and courage, a mother doing whatever she could for her child, and a child trusting the world despite everything. Days slipped into weeks, and Ethan found himself coming to the café less to wait for someone who never came, and more simply to be there, to read, to think, to inhabit his own life again. One morning when he walked in, Margaret gave him a knowing smile and told him he had visitors. He turned toward the corner table and saw Grace and Lily sitting there, both smiling shyly. Lily hopped down from her chair and ran toward him, clutching a small drawing in her hand, a picture of 3 stick figures holding hands under a single umbrella. "Mommy said we should thank you properly," she said brightly as she held it out. Grace's cheeks flushed as she watched, her eyes warm and full of quiet gratitude. They spent hours talking that day. Grace told him she had found a part-time job at a bookstore, and although things were still difficult, she said life finally felt like it was moving forward instead of standing still. Ethan offered help where he could, not from pity, but from a growing sense that something important was unfolding between them, something that didn't have a name yet, but felt steady and real. Over the months that followed, what had begun as an act of kindness slowly deepened into a quiet, grounded connection. Grace brought color back into his world, not the wild, unpredictable bursts that Emily once had, but a gentle, consistent warmth, honesty, presence, and the simple beauty of someone who kept showing up. She didn't offer big promises. She offered reliability. Lily became the laughter in his silence, the unexpected light in the spaces that had once felt empty. She called him Mr. Ethan, peppered him with endless questions about the stars and the sea, and why the rain always sounded louder at night, and gifted him with more crayon drawings than he knew what to do with. By the time spring rolled around, Ethan no longer sat by the window watching the door, waiting for Emily to return. Instead, he sat with Grace and Lily at a shared table, sipping coffee and hot chocolate as they watched the rain fall together. One evening, as they sat in their familiar spot, Grace stared out at the wet city and said softly that she still remembered the first night she saw him, sitting right there by the window while she stood outside crying. Ethan smiled and told her that she had looked like someone who needed to be found. She turned to him, her eyes shining, and replied that maybe they both had. Outside, the rain began again, not cold and lonely this time, but soft and cleansing, like the beginning of something new instead of the reminder of something lost. If this story touched your heart, take a moment to like the video, share it with someone who needs a reminder that kindness still exists, and subscribe to the channel for more heartfelt stories about second chances and unexpected connections. And before you go, tell us in the comments, do you believe people are meant to meet for a reason, even if it's just once in a lifetime? As the camera fades out on that rainy cafe window, Ethan's first words echo softly in the background. She never came. But now, they carry a new ending. She never came. But maybe someone even better did. And somewhere in the gentle rhythm of the rain, life seems to whisper back, "You were never waiting in vain."